I'm Teisha Bader with Shalom TV's news update for Friday, February the 7th, 2014. More rocket fire hit southern Israel last night. 2 rockets fired from Gaza. One landed in an open area near Ashkelon and the other in an open area near the Eshkol Regional Council. No damage or injuries were reported. Last night's rocket attack follows an earlier rocket attack on Ashkelon yesterday afternoon that also ended with no damage or injury. Israel's Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman is voicing his support for U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and warning against damaging relations with the U.S. There's been criticism against Kerry from those on the right in the Israeli government following Kerry's remarks in Munich last weekend, as we reported to you, suggesting that boycotts against Israel could worsen if peace is not achieved. Kerry has since reiterated that he was simply citing what others have said and that he himself has always opposed boycotts and that he stands strongly with Israel. During a speech at the Commercial and Industrial Business Club in Tel Aviv, Lieberman called Kerry a true friend of Israel yesterday and said he supported the Secretary of State's efforts to reach a two-state solution and to land swaps, though he also said that he was not willing to pay any price for reaching a peace deal with the Palestinians, and that Israel's security concerns were a vital component of any agreement.
Iran will be a nuclear state.
Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, Malcolm Hoenlein, expressed his concerns over the anti-Israel boycott phenomenon, saying it was one of the greatest challenges facing Israel. Hoenlein told an Associated Press interview this week that the boycott campaign masks a, quote, politically correct form of anti-Semitism and urged zero tolerance of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or BDS movement. Hoenlein told AP, "We have to counter the BDS movement in the strongest possible way. That means zero tolerance," adding people are beginning to recognize how nefarious this is, how insidious this movement is, that it is not something to be dismissed. Hoenlein said BDS efforts undermine prospects for peace and economically harm the Palestinians. He said at least one mayor of a large Palestinian city has asked him to combat the boycott movement for fear of the jobs it would cost Palestinians in Israeli settlements. And staying with the issue of boycotts, the Times of Israel reports that 2 congressmen from Illinois introduced the bipartisan Protect Academic Freedom Act, a bill that would bar federal funding to American colleges and universities taking part in an academic boycott of Israel. Republican Representative Peter Roskam and Democrat Dan Lipinski presented the act yesterday in response to what they see as, quote, the growing threat of unjustified boycotts against the Jewish state of Israel, and cited the decision made this past December by the American Studies Association as what sparked it. This bill comes just one day after the New York State Assembly withdrew a similar bill. Roskam, who serves as the co-chair of the House Republican Israel Caucus, said this bipartisan legislation seeks to preserve academic freedom and combat bigotry by shielding Israel from unjust boycotts. It is ludicrous, he said, for critics to go after our democratic friend and ally Israel when they should be focusing on the evils perpetrated by repressive, authoritarian regimes like Iran and North Korea. Roskam said that former Israeli Ambassador Michael Oren was instrumental to his work on the issue, and Oren included a statement together with the bill's announcement, which is quite unusual. Oren said the bill represents the first legislation that defends Israel against discriminatory boycotts. He said, as a citizen of Israel and its former ambassador to the United States, as well as an historian and visiting professor on leading American campuses, I strongly support this courageous initiative. Oren said it can be the turning point in the struggle against the delegitimization of the Jewish state.
That speaks to the
American Israel Public Affairs Committee has reportedly changed its position on the passage of new sanctions against Iran, following a speech given by Democratic New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez on the Senate floor yesterday, in which the senator stated that dealing with Iran deserved a, quote, spirit of bipartisanship and unity. AIPAC issued a statement saying that it agreed with Menendez. It said, "We agree with the chairman that stopping the Iranian nuclear program should rest on bipartisan support and that there should not be a vote at this time on the measure. Adding, we remain committed to working with the administration and the bipartisan leadership in Congress to ensure that the Iran nuclear program is dismantled. Last November, when details of the interim deal between Iran and world powers first emerged, AIPAC, along with other Jewish groups, expressed concern that the agreement was giving too much for too little and that they would push for more sanctions against Iran. AIPAC is America's pro-Israel lobby committed to promoting the U.S.-Israel relationship from both sides of the aisle. Several Jewish groups are criticizing a recent publication by the Presbyterian Church USA's Israel-Palestine Mission Network. The president of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs called the network's publication, set to be used as a study guide, quote, worthy of a hate group, not a prominent American church. JCPA President Rabbi Steve Gutto responded to the congregational resource titled Zionism Unsettled, which brands Zionism as a, quote, false and oppressive theology and compares it to Nazism. Gutto urged the church to reject the publication, calling it, quote, an affront to Jews, Israel, peacemaking, and truth-telling. And the American Jewish Committee's Director of Intergroup and Interreligious Relations, Rabbi Noah Marans, called the educational resource a, quote, devastating distortion of Jewish and Israeli history, aimed at nothing less than eradicating the State of Israel. Marin said the study guide is reminiscent of medieval Christian polemics against Judaism, with the authors claiming to know better than the Jewish community how Jews define themselves. He said it was another example of the ongoing effort to demonize Israel. The publication, which is on sale on the PC USA website, was released in advance of the church's General Assembly, which will take place in June, and will vote on whether to support a resolution supporting the BDS or boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. The Associated Press reports that Spain has announced new legislation that would speed up the naturalization of Jews whose ancestors fled the country 5 centuries ago during the Spanish Inquisition, when they were told to convert to Catholicism or go into exile, and many of those who did not convert were executed. Spain's cabinet approved a bill today amending previous legislation that granted citizenship to Sephardic Jews who applied for it. The amendment now would allow for those who can prove a Spanish ancestry to obtain Spanish citizenship and hold on to previous citizenships. Interested applicants have to first be approved by the government and the Spanish Federations of Jewish Communities. And turning to our Shalom TV programming for tonight, Friday, February the 7th, live Shabbat services are coming up from New York City's Central Synagogue at 6 p.m. And a programming note for later in the weekend, Sunday night at 7 p.m., another breakout session from the Jewish Federations of North America's recent General Assembly, which was held in Jerusalem, and features former Chief Rabbi of Great Britain, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, who discusses his interpretation of the recent Pew Report and provides his answer to the question, why be Jewish? That's here on Shalom TV and ShalomTV.com. And that's Shalom TV's news update for Friday, February the 7th, 2014. I'm Teisha Bader. Shabbat Shalom.